Real-Time 1960s presents Evening Report, a complete roundup of today's news with Joe Rubenstein.
Good evening. At the White House, Robert McNamara briefs the president on Vietnam. In California, Barry Goldwater speaks out. In New York, Robert Kennedy is a guest on the Jack Paar Show. Malcolm X defects from the Nation of Islam, and the Boston Celtics set another record. Those are the headlines. The details after this message.
During your lifetime, you wash your face over 25,000 times. 25,000 exposures to the drying effects of soap. Yes, soap. All soap can dry your skin. That's why you should switch from soap to Dove.
There's no dry feeling with Dove. My skin feels so soft. Soap can dry your skin, not Dove. Dove creams your skin while you wash.
Choose white Dove or new lightly scented pink Dove.
In Saigon Sunday, Defense Secretary Robert McNamara said the U.S. will stay in South Vietnam as long as necessary and will provide whatever aid is needed to defeat the Communist Viet Cong. The statement echoed a declaration made by President Johnson at his news conference the day before. The president was asked at that time if North Vietnamese escalation of the war might affect plans to gradually withdraw American forces and turn over more of the fighting to the South Vietnamese. Last December, 1,000 U.S. training troops came home, and Secretary McNamara told Congress last month that the U.S. still hoped to withdraw most of its troops by the end of 1965.
I don't think that the American public has fully understood the reason for our withdrawing any advisors from South Vietnam, and I think they should. We've called back approximately 1,000 people. A good many of those people, several hundred, were there training guards and policemen. Once those people were trained, why, we felt that they could act as well as policemen as our people could act. So we withdrew those people. From time to time, as our training missions completed, other people will be withdrawn. From time to time, as additional advisors are needed, we'll send them out there. I think that a good deal will depend on what Secretary McNamara advises concerning who is withdrawn, when they're withdrawn, and who is sent out and when they're sent out. The Secretary, with General Taylor and a very able staff, are there now carefully studying the question and will be there almost a week. But because we withdraw some MPs from Saigon, there's no indication that we're not still just as interested in South Vietnam as we've always been.
On Monday, Secretary McNamara toured the South Vietnamese countryside with that nation's leader, General Nguyen Con, who attained power in a bloodless coup 3 months ago. Mr. McNamara's speeches were translated sentence by sentence, except for the last line, the national cheer, which he spoke in Vietnamese.
We fully support General Con. We fully support his government. We fully support the people of South Vietnam. We are prepared to furnish whatever economic aid, whatever military training and logistical support, whatever military equipment is required, in whatever quantities are required, and for as long as that is required. Vietnam, Mo Nam! Vietnam, Mo Nam! Vietnam, Mo Nam!
The Vietnamese words translate as Vietnam 1,000 years. This afternoon, Mr. McNamara returned from Vietnam and met with President Johnson at the White House. In a recent interview, the Defense Secretary was asked to clarify U.S. options in South Vietnam.
First is to withdraw completely from the area. Second is to move toward neutralization. A third is to initiate military actions outside of South Vietnam, particularly against North Vietnam. And the fourth is to make more effective the program of economic assistance, military training, and logistical support, which we extend to the government of South Vietnam.
He was asked why the administration had chosen the fourth alternative.
If the communists were to control South Vietnam, almost surely eventually their control would extend through Southeast Asia. And there would be a ripple effect as far west probably as Pakistan and as far east as the Philippines and certainly to the south through Indonesia. We categorically rejected withdrawal from South Vietnam. We've encouraged those people to fight for their independence They've asked for our assistance. We've given it. We'll continue to give it. And as far as neutralization of South Vietnam is concerned, it would be just a way station on the road to communist domination. As to initiation of military actions outside of South Vietnam, particularly against North Vietnam, we've studied the implications of that course thoroughly. We've considered alternative means of carrying it out. And whatever the ultimate course of action may be, whatever is forced upon us by our adversaries, we recognize that it will be only a supplement to and not a substitute for progress within South Vietnam itself. So we then turn to, and as a matter of fact have adopted, the fourth alternative, a program to increase the effectiveness of the current counterinsurgency effort within South Vietnam itself.
Mr. McNamara was asked why he anticipated success now, when previous efforts along the same lines had brought only a deteriorating situation in South Vietnam.
Because we now have a leader of South Vietnam, General Kahn, who himself is ready to put that nation on a war footing. He has developed a national mobilization plan to fully mobilize all of the material and personnel resources of the country. He'll probably accompany it with a national service law. And with that kind of a leadership and that kind of a program, we can much more effectively support them. We can expand our economic aid and we expand our military training and logistical support.
Finally, the secretary was asked if he remained confident that the war could be won.
There is no question in my mind but what it can be won. It will be a long struggle. It is a mean, frustrating war, but it can be won. And we propose to help the Vietnamese to win it.
In California today, Senator Barry Goldwater suggested that Ambassador Henry Cabot Lodge report to a joint session of Congress on the quote-unquote actual conditions in South Vietnam. The Arizona Republican, who was defeated in last Tuesday's New Hampshire primary by Mr. Lodge, indicated little faith in Secretary McNamara's latest fact-finding tour, stating, quote, McNamara has returned from Vietnam again, and like he did before, gives the same report, unquote. Mr. Goldwater said U.S. air and naval strikes against North Vietnam might be advisable. He contended that if the U.S., quote, went on as we are now, unquote, South Vietnam and all of Southeast Asia would be lost. When a reporter asked why he had lost in New Hampshire, Mr. Goldwater smiled and said, quote, I didn't get enough votes, unquote. I'll have more news for you after this message.
Coffee? Hey, wait. I'd sooner Lipton.
You've said the magic word. Brisk Lipton tea. It's the change of pace drink. Satisfies like coffee, but refreshes you better. It's one tea that's different. Better blend with its choice orange pico tea. Better tea bag. The Lipton Flow Through tea bag. Brews brisk, different from the usual tea. Lipton satisfies like coffee,
but refreshes you better.
That's why I'd sooner Lipton.
Brisk Lipton tea.
Here again, Joe Rubenstein.
In Washington yesterday, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy said there was no substance to reports of a feud between him and President Johnson. He addressed the matter at a meeting with students from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, who were visiting the Justice Department. Answering a student's question about the alleged feud, Mr. Kennedy said, quote, I have the highest regard for him. Our relations are friendly. They always have been. He has always been kind to me, to my family, and to Mrs. Kennedy, both as vice president and since then, unquote. The personal relationship between the two men has long been the subject of curiosity and gossip in Washington and has been discussed recently in light of the fact that many Democrats, both elected officials and regular citizens according to polls, would like Robert Kennedy to be President Johnson's running mate this year. Others who have been frequently mentioned as possibilities for the vice presidential nomination are Senator Hubert Humphrey, Adlai Stevenson, Sergeant Shriver, Senator Eugene McCarthy, and California Governor Edmund Brown. This evening, the Attorney General was the guest on Jack Paar's television program, where the only topics were the late President Kennedy and plans for the JFK Memorial Library. It was the Attorney General's first televised appearance since the assassination.
How is Mrs. Kennedy, Mrs. John Kennedy?
She's fine, really, making a adjustment and doing it well. She spends most all of her time with her children now, and I think she's making a good deal of progress.
He asked the Attorney General about plans for the JFK Memorial Library, which will be constructed on a site overlooking the Charles River in Boston.
At one time thought putting it where we live in Cape Cod, and then he finally decided that it would be more accessible to people all over the country, and particularly students, if it was placed in Boston. So he went up in the fall, I think September, October of 1963, and he picked out the location himself. It was understood, of course, at that time that all the records while he was president would be placed there. Now we've changed the concept somewhat. It's just 3 years, and then his earlier life, and then really going back into politics and the history of Massachusetts. And then the campaigns around the country. There's going to be a good deal of emphasis on political life in the United States to try to emphasize that for young people, that it's not a bad profession, that it's not a second-rate profession, and that in order to make really government and the country better, that people have to take an interest in politics and participate in one form or another.
The Attorney General was asked what he believed his older brother's greatest contribution had been.
Well, I think really he made Americans feel young again.
Yes.
And I think that he gave all of us more confidence in the country, more confidence in the struggles that we're involved in internally and externally will be successful. Also, he gave great confidence in people who lived in other countries, great confidence in the United States and in its leadership, and that we were dedicated to certain principles and ideals, and that we would live up to them and, if necessary, fight for them. And so that I think it changed over a period of years, our own feelings as well as the feelings of other peoples around the world.
Finally, Mr. Paar noted that in a recently composed introduction to the new edition of the book Profiles in Courage, the Attorney General wrote that President Kennedy had suffered considerable physical pain virtually every day of his adult life.
Very sick when he was young, and many other kinds of problems as he was growing up, but when he went in politics, of course, in the 58 campaign, he had to campaign with crutches, and then a good part of 59 and 60. And then even after he became president. But my point really was not the fact that he had pain, but he really never complained about it.
He didn't?
No, I never heard him complain. As I said in that, you could just tell, if you knew him well, by the fact that his face was whiter and the lines around his eyes were a little different, and he might be a little sharper.
A little sharper.
But he never felt that God had treated him unjustly.
On Tuesday, St. Patrick's Day, Mr. Kennedy will accompany the president's widow and Irish Ambassador Thomas Kiernan on a visit to President Kennedy's grave. In New York last Sunday, Malcolm X announced a break with the Nation of Islam and its leader, Elijah Muhammad. Since 1954, Mr. X had been minister of the nation's Temple No. 7 in Harlem, and he's been widely viewed as national spokesman for the group. On Sunday, he announced that he was organizing a broadly based, politically oriented black nationalist movement composed of Negroes of all faiths as well as non-believers. This afternoon, Mr. X formally opened his drive with a news conference at New York's Park Sheraton Hotel.
The political philosophy of black nationalism means we must control the politics and the politicians of our own community. They must no longer take orders from outside forces, and we will organize and sweep out of office all Negro politicians who are puppets for these outside forces. Our accent will be upon youth. We need new ideas, new methods, new approaches. We will call upon young students of political science throughout the nation to help us. We will encourage these young students to launch their own independent study and then give us their analysis and their suggestions. We want to see some new faces, more militant faces.
He said his new organization would accept contributions from whites, but that white people could not join because, he said, when whites join an organization, they usually take control of it.
There can be no black-white unity until there is first some black unity. There can be no workers' solidarity until there is first some racial solidarity. We cannot think of uniting with others until we have first united among ourselves. We cannot think of being acceptable to others until we have first proven acceptable to ourselves.
Finally, Mr. X gave his views on the philosophy of nonviolence, advocated by Dr. Martin Luther King and others.
It is criminal to teach a man not to defend himself. when he is the constant victim of brutal attacks. It is legal and lawful in this country to own a shotgun or a rifle, and we believe in obeying the law. In areas where our people are the constant victims of brutality, and the government seems unable or unwilling to protect them, we should form rifle clubs that can be used to defend ourselves and our property in times of emergency, such as happened last year in Birmingham, Alabama, in Plaquemine, Louisiana, in Cambridge, Maryland, and Danville, Virginia. When our people are being bitten by dogs, they are within their right to kill those dogs.
Despite his statement last Sunday that he would not seek to take members away from Elijah Muhammad's movement, Mr. X was accompanied today by several black Muslims who have apparently followed him out of the Chicago-based organization. Sports, right after this.
What's new in the dairy case? New turnover pastries. Refrigerated, not frozen, from Pillsbury. Everything for 8 pastries in one package. Luscious fruit filling, creamy icing, and flaky dough. Fresh dough for fresh home baking. 3 flavors, apple, blueberry, and cherry. In the dairy case, from Pillsbury.
In Providence, Rhode Island last night, the Celtics won their 8th consecutive Eastern Division NBA crown by defeating the Pistons 140-120. A victory worth $14,000 to the team, $2,000 for the highest win percentage, and $12,000 for the Eastern crown. With last night's triumph, the Celtics became the first major professional sports team to win a divisional championship 8 straight years. The victory means the Celtics will be able to rest up during the opening round of the Eastern playoffs and watch Oscar Robertson and the Royals battle it out with the 76ers. Wilt Chamberlain and the Warriors currently lead the West by 2 games. If San Francisco finishes in first place, the first-round Western combatants would be the Hawks and the Lakers. And finally tonight, station WOR-TV will add some color to the New York Mets this season. $400,000 worth of color TV equipment has been installed at Shea Stadium, the Mets' new home, which opens for business next month. All 81 home games and some road games will be televised in color over Channel 9 in New York. At the Mets spring training headquarters in St. Petersburg, Florida, 73-year-old manager Casey Stengel was asked today how his losing club drew a bigger box office last year than almost any other team in the major leagues.
Well, that's because the public in New York supported the ball club. They were loyal for years and years to the New York Giants. They were loyal to the Brooklyn Dodgers. We only had one team there, which was the Yankee team. It was doing splendid in itself, but they wanted to see another team come back into the field. And why shouldn't they go out and patronize? There's too many people in New York City. It's a cosmopolitan town in which when you go into a city of that size, there should be more than one entertainment. They decided they wanted to. It proved to Chamber of Commerce in New York City and to the governor and also to Mayor Wagner that we could draw over 1 million people, which proved the city is a better place for baseball than 15 franchises that are in the major leagues at the present time. There's 10 or 12 cities in the major league. They think they're major league cities, but they don't draw 1 million, and they maybe were up in the race. It shows that we should have another team that's in New York, and they proved it and stuck by the team.
Shea Stadium, which most of the Met players have yet to see in person, will feature spacious parking lots, escalators, 5 multicolored seating levels with unobstructed views, uniformed ushers and usherettes, immaculate restrooms, and a huge electronic scoreboard. The dream park New Yorkers have longed for years will soon become a reality. And that, for this evening, completes our look at the latest news on this Friday, March 13th, 1964. Thank you for joining us, and have a great day tomorrow.
This has been your Evening Report, a roundup of the latest news with Joe Rubenstein.